there's a value to postmodernism that Jordan Peterson misses, I would argue, steeply, which is that...
And even he acknowledges the value of it, but maybe there's more that...
I think there's more, right? I think, like, for example, deconstructivists really encourage us to, like, be like, why do we build our society and our norms in the way that we do? And why do we come to hold some of them as axioms that are probably fundamentally somewhat arbitrary? And when I say arbitrary, everyone hates that word. Arbitrary doesn't mean meaningless. I guess I just mean, like, they're constructed, right?
Yeah.
Like they can be different if we decided to be. And the things that we've constructed are cool, but what would our society look like if we constructed different things?
Sure.
And I think there's certain axioms of, like, dominantly, I would argue, Protestant white culture that I would like to actually deconstruct more, that I think Jordan Peterson supports more.
Sure.
Like, I don't think Jordan Peterson's very good at telling people how to be happy. I don't think he's a very happy guy. And I think
get that
that's something that we need.
Yes.
Yeah,
well,
I think that's his bane. That's why he's fucking psycho now.
Yeah.
Is I think he's probably brain damaged. He's extremely resentful of the left, understandably. He went through, like, pretty traumatic near-death experiences multiple times.
Yeah.
He's been exceedingly villainized by a group that he used to associate with, and he's fallen into the comfy arms of conservatives who are willing to accept him and talk with him and not treat him like shit. So unsurprisingly, he went there, and he's always been a pretty unhappy guy. And so, like, he offers a lot, but he doesn't teach people to be happy. And I really think that's, like, one of the biggest things our society is missing. I don't think postmodernists have it, but I think they're actually closer than Jordan Peterson is to.
Well, I'm glad that we had such a kind and nice conversation earlier, because the question I was going to ask you is, why the fuck do you hate Jordan Peterson so much? But
I hate him so much.
I know. So I understand that. I would push back on it to some degree. So first off, I agree with you. From my observation, and I do not know, but I would say he's got a lot of anger, repressed anger. And I remember he has never gone to a therapist. He's never seen a therapist himself, which I thought was interesting, being a therapist himself. I was like, wouldn't you want to have some experience of it or whatnot? Which leads me to think that he's missed some things in himself. And I agree, the near-death experience, which, you know, I don't believe he's a liar. I honestly don't. He has many flaws, and we could talk for a while. We probably will, but I don't think he lies. I don't think he... I mean, everyone lies to themselves, unconsciously. So we all tell stories about ourselves that we think are true but aren't actually true, and if we traced it down, wouldn't be, and that's kind of why you go to therapy. But I don't think he consciously lies. And so when he says, like, he felt like he was dying every day for months, like, I don't think he's exaggerating. I know people say, like, the cider example. Like, I had some cider and I was off for 2 months. It's like, that seems like a very strange lie to tell. If he was to tell a lie, that would be the strangest one to tell. It would seem not to serve it. And so,
yeah.
That being said, and we can get it. There's a couple ways. So I'm curious to understand more about the happiness idea, because I really resonate with this idea of meaning is more important or more valuable or more fulfilling than happiness. Happiness and joy, from the way I would conceptualize it, are, it's things, they're feelings that you get on the way to, well, it's not even on the way to a goal, because sometimes they can just happen out of nowhere or whatever. It's a feeling that kind of shows up in the middle of somewhere. But, like, my favorite memories, the memories that are most valuable to me, are not memories of happiness per se. They're memories of meaning, which is like when I would talk to a friend for 3 hours or 4 hours going until like 3 a.m. at night, right? It's like I wasn't happy per se. It was meaningful. When I'm playing video games and, I play like League of Legends with some friends and we do kind of some competitive stuff every now and then. It's like I'm definitely not happy during League. I'm slamming the fucking desk sometimes, but it's like, any sport, like, you're not happy when you're engaged in a sport. You're engaged in it and it's meaningful, and then you're happy when you win, maybe, and that's sort of a after effect, a satiating effect. But the engagement itself, to me, that's more meaningful, that's more valuable in my opinion. But what do you think of that? Because you think he doesn't teach you how to be happy. So
no. And I would guess I'd argue, how could he? He's a deeply unhappy person. He's been depressed since he was 12, probably to some level biologically.
Which
right?
I think he admits. I think he said depression runs in his family, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Right. So, um, essentially, I guess it comes down to this. You know how he talks a lot, and I think a lot of people would agree that the things that happen on a daily are really, really important. You got to make sure that you figure them out. So, if you're in a relationship with somebody, I know the dishes are meaningless, but they're also everything, because if every single day you're fighting over the dishes, it's going to ruin your relationship more than like some major acute moment. The acute moment, right, might ruin your
Straw that
relationship,
breaks the
but
camel back.
most marriages fall apart because of these like finances,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Finances is often this daily constant negotiation that you have to figure out. That's what kills most relationships, is daily stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think like in psychology in general, and I think this is probably part of where maybe his bias comes from as well. In psychology, we're pretty good at analyzing the acute moments, right? We're really good at being like, oh yeah, traumatic event happened, trauma response occurred, PTSD developed, right? And we can kind of track that along. So we tend to know pretty well how to orient ourselves around major acute moments. But those daily small things, right? When we're talking about something like dysthymia, which is like a chronic form of depression that's mild but lasts for at least 2 years, we don't know much about it because we've never really researched it that much. And we don't really know its etiology. We don't really know how to treat it. It seems to be this like chronic, persistent unhappiness. And I think he talks a lot about how important it is to figure out the daily stuff. And you're right, meaning is really important. I think if people don't have a sense of meaning in their life and they only have like simple happiness, they tend to be pretty unfulfilled. It seems like we need both of these things, though, to me. I don't think that we should weigh meaning over happiness. For example, some of the most important moments in my life, even though they don't stand out in my brain, are when I'm laying in bed and Nick's beside me and he like flops and snuggles onto me and my dog is laying here and she puts her head on my chest. It's not deeply meaningful. Life hasn't changed. There's no great grand thing I could try to pull meaning from it and try to like make it this grand thing. But the reality is it's just simple. It's just simple happiness. I'm with somebody I love and a dog that I love and I'm comfy and I'm warm and I'm safe and I'm just there. I'm just there.
It's like peace.
And I'm happy.
Peace, right?
Yeah, which is really simple. And so it feels like a lot of people who are big into meaning will like steal those moments and be like, but it's happy because it's meaningful. And it's like, sort of, but it's also really simple. Like it's really, really simple. And that's what a lot of people crave. And I don't think our society or our culture is good at doing this at all. We really overlook
Sure.
those simple things of just being like, it's really nice to just like come home and like pat my husband on the butt and then we chuckle. There's not a lot of meaning. It doesn't mean much. When I die, nobody's gonna like write on my gravestone, she papped bums the best, right? But the fact that like we can have that little positive interaction, to me, is everything. Meaning is also everything. Like both of these matter, but I think people often fall into like this nihilistic depression because they're missing one or the other, right? And I think in a lot of cases, it seems like men are missing both yeah, for a lot of people, which is I think why Jordan Peterson resonated for so many young men, is he taught them about meaning, because men kind of lost it. We didn't really know how to extract meaning anymore.
So what would your advice be then if it was, so let's say we agree that meaning comes from responsibility or having goals and doing those things. What would you advise in terms of like how do people get happiness on top of their meaning?
So I'm still figuring this out because I am a person who I am very good at having meaning. This is why I say I am a archetypal white male. I am excellent at white male shit. My life has deep meaning. I have a very long-term
Racist
goal.
and sexist. No, just kidding. Go.
Yeah, but I really am. I archetype onto all of this like Protestant white male shit really well. I've got tons of meaning. I'm a really hard worker. I've spent my whole life training to be good at fucking meaning because I'm good at that shit. But damn, I was never happy. I was never content. I was never content. And it was like it's literally killing me. It's ruining my body because I can never just be happy. And so like, what does it look like? And like, how do you achieve it? I'm still working on that. For me, meditation's a big one. I need to get like out of my head sometimes and into my body. That's huge for me.
I was going to bring that up as one of the things. I actually, as you're talking, I resonate because there is an element of me that it's like you get this like toxic productivity mindset where it's like meaning. I'm gonna have a calendar. I'm gonna fill it up and become as productive as possible. Make as many YouTube videos or read as many books or do whatever. And there is a part of me that, I think there's an Alan Watts quote or statement about, like, when you meditate, you shouldn't be meditating to achieve better focus. You shouldn't be meditating to achieve all these different outcomes.
Sorry, 1 second.
Yep.
Where'd you put my bathrobe?
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Meditation shouldn't be.
Yeah, meditation, it shouldn't be about like improving your focus. It shouldn't be about improving anything. You should only be seeking to meditate to achieve a state of peace, which is that seems to conflict with, at least in my understanding, Jordan Peterson's sort of worldview, where everything has to be nested in a set of goals, right? And if the goal itself the goal of meditation should be to get to a place where goals don't mean anything, right? To just experience yourself. And it does, I would agree that Peterson probably does not meditate, and probably has never meditated, maybe. But, I don't know. But people like Sam Harris meditate, and he's on the more materialist, rationalist side of things, but he takes kind of that spiritual approach. So that makes sense. I guess...
I don't think meditation is the one
Sure,
goal
you're right.
to get there.
Yes.
I think you actually have to be, like, at least for me, I have to think about it all the time and actively try constantly to just be simply happy. And it's like, it's insane. It's insane how I'm not content, because it's like, okay, me and my husband are both working. Our incomes, to be honest, are pretty miserable, but you can actually get by with not a lot of money, especially if you have like a roommate and you're a young adult with like no kids, right? So it's like, we probably make less than 40K a year, but we can get by. We have a roommate, so it's financeable for us. So we have enough. I'm streaming right now as my only job. And so it's like, I can set my own schedule. There's stresses, right, of people like being nasty and rude and needlessly cruel. Like, that sucks. But it's actually filled as well with tons of people who like adore you, probably for no reason, who constantly, I get like regular emails just being like, thank you, you've inspired me. I have people telling me that like I've inspired them to go to the gym and work out. Like, it's like, you also get tons and tons of adulation.
Would you say that that's a feeling of, when you get an email like that, because I've gotten the same thing, people have emailed me and said like long paragraphs and stuff, and it's like, for me, I would describe that as meaningful, less so than happy. But is that how you describe it, or would you say that's like a moment of happiness versus like, oh, this is validation that I'm doing something? Yeah, you describe it.
Yeah, it's much more meaningful. It's definitely not happiness, right? Because happiness isn't. This is the thing. Happiness ain't all that deep. And it doesn't have to be. It can just be simple, right? When I go outside and my dog runs around and does some dumb shit and I laugh, it's not all that deep. I don't have to write a poem about it. There's not a philosophical thing I can take from it.
Sure.
I'm just kind of like, my dog's silly and funny, and that's nice.
Yeah, and I totally get, and I've been, yes, when I'm lying down next to my dog, it's like, or when he was around a couple years ago. But let me pose it like this, because I think, and again, I'm Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was you're familiar, the psychologist who was in the concentration camps and kind of pushed through it. I think he has a book called Fundamentals of Logotherapy or something like that, which is his psychoanalytical philosophy. And I buy into it a lot, and it lines up with Peterson, and I want to get your thoughts, where I don't think you can experience happiness unless you are embedded in a network of meaning, which is very, very vague. And also, I recognize that meaning and happiness, a lot of people would maybe, put those terms in the same. So, there's some level of imprecision that we might just,
I think they have to be separate, though. I think
I do too.
Society is they need to be separate,
right?
Because meaning is deep, it's rich,
right? And so
happiness is simple.
Those moments of happiness, I think the reason that you're able to experience them is because you are in. So, like you were talking about, with your husband, it's a moment of peace and happiness. But the relationship, I'm assuming, is meaningful. It's sort of the bedrock of meaning in terms of moving through life with a partner or something. And so that happiness is an outcropping of meaning. And like for example, I don't know how would I phrase this, but like, I don't think you can experience happiness unless you also have a sense of meaning in your life. Otherwise, it's just pleasure, chemically induced or sexually induced or very short term or whatever. But the genuine happiness, the joy that we're talking about, is a secondary consequence of meaning. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
The issue is that you can have a ton of meaning in your life and no happiness. And I think our society is not very good at teaching people how to have meaning, how to have happiness.
So what would because, okay, that's interesting, because I think I understand that, a life with all meaning but no happiness. How would you conceptualize
Jordan Peterson's
that?
a great example. Jordan Peterson is a great example. I'm not saying that he never has happiness, but he probably has a deeply meaningful life. I think most people who are decently successful, who've worked really hard and have some level of success, especially in career, I think career is a very common way that we map on meaning. Sure. Most of them will tell you that their life is decently meaningful, but then they go home and there's like a hole. Mm-hmm. What is that? Because that was my life. And I just kept working because I was like, come on. Well, but people keep saying meaning.
Right. So
it's got to fill it at some point, right? And it doesn't.
Isn't that an indicator? Do you feel that what you do on stream is much more meaningful, at least for now?
It's both. I try to do both. The problem is that I'm as obsessed with meaning as a lot of Protestant white men are. I'm not good at happiness.
Why do you say Protestant white men? What is that? I get the meme level reference, but when you say Protestant white men, what do you mean by that?
Basically kind of like cultural zeitgeist heritage of a lot of this, like this push for success, this push for growth, this push for more. Like it seems like a lot of the Protestant white cultures did this a lot. This isn't to say that others don't. This is just like the archetype I'm using. And you're right, it's mostly a meme. I'm mostly just like using this as a fast referral because people, if I say that, people broadly know what I mean. I'm not really trying to like stick it exclusively to race because somebody's gonna be like, what do you mean? Like a lot of like Asian cultures are extremely intense. And I'm like, I know.
Well, Michael Jordan is like the archetype of like, win at all costs mentality. And
exactly. The hustle culture, it borrows from the Protestant. So when I'm memeing at white, it's mostly because like white people in North America have been classically understood to be the most successful at these things.
And you're in the Twitch politics space, so there's an element of Canada. Yeah, and it's the only reason I bring that up is because I struggle with when I am like I don't know how many people are watching or anything, but when I'm talking to you, I like to get in conversation mode where I I think I understood what you were saying, but recently as I've gotten bigger, I have to keep in mind. I was on Sitch. Do you know who Sitch and Adam are by any chance?
I've heard of them. Some people have told me about them.
Yeah, they got like a small, bigger than, I think, 4 times as big as you by subscribers, and that makes it 20 times as big as me by subscribers. But big enough where, and people were commenting because I was talking and people were like, oh, this guy hates your. It's like, dude, I make a lot of videos explaining the complexities of maps and meaning, and I wouldn't do that unless I got value and felt that the ideas were valuable and whatnot. And I realized that like when people like say like the Protestant white thing, it's like, well, there's like part of me feels an obligation to push back, even though I understand what you're saying. There's part of me that feels like an obligation to push back on behalf of like my audience or whatever, which is to speak of this is kind of a separate thing we could kind of go into, but like balancing social media versus balancing the online persona versus like the authentic person, because you can't I could, but I don't think it's effective. I don't think it's good for me mentally or anyone to come in here and just speak to you with all filters down like I would in a therapy session, right? Like that doesn't seem optimal. But then on the flip side, if I just come in like a madam, and just play a character, it's like that seems also suboptimal. Although maybe Mr. Sunday wasn't playing as much of a character. Anyway, I won't drag him into this.
Hard to say.
Yeah, but I guess
maybe could I rephrase it? This might work better because I'll stop using kind of the meme archetype. Meaning pursuit seems deeply human. It seems like, I don't know, did you ever read Aristotle when he talks about like eudaimonia and meaning and how he's talking about like purpose of different creatures. And he says like, like a lion, you would say like the purpose of a lion is to like be a bunch, like what is the purpose behind it? And that should probably be like one of the most important things that the lion evolves to pursue, right? To being a hunter. That's probably the most important thing for lions to be. So they've evolved in many ways to like express things that make them good at hunters, good vision and sharp claws and teeth and blah, 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 blah. And he says, what if humans, what is the purpose of humans? Like what is the thing that they are best designed for? And he says, it's very clearly not happiness. because humans are very bad at being happy. And so then he talks about like, but you know what we are pretty good at is we're very cognitive, we're very intellectual beings. Maybe we're good at finding things like eudaimonia, which in many ways maps onto essentially like this deeper, richer meaning and joy, which is I think why humans pursuing meaning is like a deeply human thing. So when I'm calling it the archetype of like the Protestant work ethic, it's just because it's mostly a meme. I'm really talking about this very fundamental human thing, which seems to be that we pursue to some degree meaning, but I'm concerned that in the face of that, we forget how to do simple happiness. It's almost like the man and the beast of us, or like at war, where like dogs seem really good at being simply happy. They're not very good at pursuing meaning, though, right? You know, you come home, you give them a ball, and they're like, oh, yay, right? But it doesn't go much deeper than that. They like their people, but most dogs that I know aren't pursuing some greater career. I haven't seen any dogs establishing charities or doing any like major networking or anything like that. They just kind of exist, and they're happy when they're happy, and they're sad when they're sad, and they have very, very simple lives in many ways. Not because they're intellectually like blah blah blah, but because like animals have simple lives. They live for simple things. It feels like as humanity has gotten more complex, which it seems all humans have just been driven to do. We've been getting increasingly complex, it seems, since our nascence as a species. It feels like we've forgotten how to just be simply happy. And I'm concerned that a lot of our mental health problems stem in large part from this, is that we don't train people very well of how to like be happy.
Sure. Well, okay. Let me ask, because I asked you what would your prescription be, and you said you don't know, you're still figuring it out. Mm-hmm. So you're saying your criticism of, let's say, Jordan Peterson is he doesn't teach people how to be happy, but you don't know what the right way to teach people to be happy is. So
not yet. I'm still figuring out. I have some steps that I know are working for me.
Okay,
but
so then
I couldn't say I could replicate them in somebody else.
Sure.
Yet.
So would it be fair to so then, and just going back to the internet kind of persona versus character thing, it's like there's a big part of me that's like I really want to stop being the Jordan Peterson says this, Jordan Peterson says, it's like he's got some good ideas and I'll apply them where I need to be, but in this regard, I'll just stick with it. Is not the best. It seems to me the best strategy that we know of is to pursue meaning, and happiness will come as a secondary consequence of that. That's the best strategy that we know of so far, and that's what Jordan Peterson advocates for. So is there anything wrong with that?
We've been advocating for that for a really long time.
I would disagree. I would say that
time.
Okay, and maybe it's just perception, or maybe it's just different circles or something, but I think the whole idea of the nutshell thing I tell people of like what's Jordan Peterson's psychological advice in a nutshell is if you're depressed or something and I tell you, hey, just be yourself, just be who you are, just know who you are on the inside, be yourself. It's like that's bullshit, because be yourself is depressed, and it carries with you all the problems of being depressed, and if you're 15 or 16 or 17, you certainly don't know who you are, and so to say be yourself, it's worthless advice. So it's like actually the idea of no. Humans are as much cultural creatures as they are biological, obviously. That's like a central tenet of the left-wing deconstructionists. And so, it's like, consider that the culture that we're in, if we were just biological, we'd just be animals, and we'd be in a constant state of war and violence and, all the horrific things we describe horrific acts of behavior as animalistic for a reason. So if it were just biological, we'd just be in that horrific side. So consider that the culture that we're in provides that, positive structure, and consider that as a child you have yet to fully realize the potential of your cultural traditions, which are, hey, grow up, start a family, if that suits you, or pursue a career, or do all these different things. Our culture has created so many ways to pursue meaning, and there are classic ways of starting a family and whatnot, and having a monogamous relationship or a polygamous relationship or whatever, depending on your personality. So why tell someone be who you are when you don't even know who you are, and there's so much that you still could be that's yet realized? To me, that's like, because all we've been fed, certainly in my life, just be who you are, and I've got friends, and they're well-meaning, but they're just like, Paul, just recognize that you deserve the world. It's like that is the most white Protestant privilege thing I've ever heard. Is you just deserve the world just for being me. It's like, no, I'm lucky to be in the position, and I strive to earn the privilege that I've definitely been granted. But for me to say, well, I deserve happiness a priori, it's like that is a mystical idea that has no bearing in reality. And to me, the more practical and real and deeper idea is, be something and deserve the privilege that was bestowed upon you, and deserve what you've been given culturally. And I think the reason JP is successful is because that message was starved. But you think maybe differently or see it differently?
I think he like rebranded it. Maybe it's starved. I could be wrong about this. About like it's never been talked about. I feel like maybe I guess like when I look in history, I see like multiple waves of major thinkers advocating for meaning. So I actually had a thought while you were talking. Perhaps I'd be here. I just came up with this thought, so I could be wrong. I'm curious what you think about it. But humans, one of the most incredible adaptable things about humans is they future project. It seems like more than basically any other species, right? Most species don't predict and plan for stuff the way that humans do. That's part of what has made us so deeply, deeply adaptable. That's why we developed agriculture.
Right.
So thinking of the future, mapping onto the future, and trying to essentially look at risks in the future and try to essentially preventatively counteract them now, right? If winter's coming, you better start preparing for it in the summer.
Yep.
If you react in the winter, you're too fucking late and you're going to die, right? Humans are really, really, really good at future projection, which is probably not exclusively, but one of the main reasons in part of why we adapted to be such a dominant species, is we just really started doing a lot of forethought and thinking. And as we had to do more forethought and thinking, it became naturally selected that those who did more forethought, more thinking, more cognitive, it's a highly cognitive process, those evolved and had more babies, blah, 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 and now we're very smart.
Discovery of the future is Peterson's term. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's a much more concise way of saying it. I think discovery of the future at its best is finding meaning. And at its worst, it's anxiety and depression.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Yeah, awareness of your own mortality.
Yeah. And that's where a lot of anxiety and these like logos therapies come from, is I think they're solving this one big issue, which is our cognitive human issue, which is that when we think about the future too often, it's easy to be daunted. It reminds me of, when I do a talk on anxiety, do you know the ancient story from Mesopotamia of like Tiamat and Absu, her husband Absu, and their children?
I believe so. Is it Tiamat is the chaos dragon, right? And
Mother, yeah.
Mother. And Apsu is her child or her husband?
It's her first husband. First husband. And Tiamat has a bunch of children who are like the Titans, sort of. And they basically go to war with her and cut her up, and they make the world out of her pieces. That's later. So
okay, because Peterson talks about it all the time. Which just real quick, on that note, because it's really interesting. I just love saying that. The idea of cutting up a dragon or cutting up like an animal, and then you make the world out of it. There's a hypothesis that like we were hunter gatherers and we made structures out of like mammoth tusks, and we did that for so many years that it became like part of our psychology. So like there's a little bit of projection in that mythology. Just an interesting tidbit, but continue.
Mm-hmm. So I really like this story because I think it's a really interesting story about anxiety. So Tiamat and Absu have a bunch of children, and Absu is a little bit tyrannical, and their children get it in their heads that Absu's going to kill them. It's not super clear. In a bunch of the readings I do, as a lot of old mythologies, not really clear why. They're just one day decide, they like hear a rumor, they're like, we think Absu's going to kill us, right? And so like, oh fuck, we got to get him first. So they project into the future and they say, in the future he's going to kill us. So the best way we stave off this future harm and fearful thing is to act now. So they lure Absu into a basement. Who knows what basement? Again, mythology's weird. And they kill him. Tiamat finds out, and as a result of them killing Absu, she kills all of those children. And it's a great story of anxiety where oftentimes the thing that you fear, when you act on it now, creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that often ends up mapping on and creating the exact circumstance you were afraid of in the future. We see this in social anxiety all the time. You go into a conversation and you're super afraid. You're afraid of the big Absu dragon. You're like, oh no, what if they judge me? What if they think I'm weird? And then because you're fixated on whether or not you're weird so much, you're kind of fucking weird, and you react strangely and stiffly, and you don't laugh when you're supposed to. And then people look at you and they think that you're a little bit weird because you are being weird, but the only reason you're being weird is because you're afraid of being weird. Yes. And so it creates this very cyclical, nasty pattern. And so in many ways, I feel like future thinking at its best is world creation, and at its worst, it's destruction, right? And so I think meaning is an excellent answer for the human condition of future thinking. But we forget that humans are also animals. We're also here right now in the present. And that's why I really like kind of this fourth wave of like meditative mindfulness psychology, because the whole point is to just be here now. It's not complex. There's nothing deep to it. You just look at your dog and you go, this thing loves me more than anyone else in the world ever will and ever could, just because I am. Mm-hmm. And that's it. And in that moment, you can either fret and be like, well, what if my dog dies in the future? It's future thinking. Or you can just be present. My dog loves me. And that is actually really beautiful. It's simple. You can make meaning. You can extract meaning from it. This is the thing. I think happiness often leads to meaning in its own right. And so I see kind of this like somewhat like dialectical relationship between meaning and happiness, and it feels like meaning is a great solution to future thinking. I think meaning is the best way to think about the future and prepare for the future, but I think happiness is the best way to engage in the now, right? I think of this story, it's from Brené Brown. She talks about this man who he's very business oriented, very fixated, very like future thinking. He's the classic future thinking kind of stability boomer who, like, when you're going camping, you just want to enjoy it, but he's constantly worrying about like, how we're cleaning
401k. Yep.
Yeah. He's like, are we cleaning these things enough? Is the trailer okay? Well, we have to do this. We have to do this. We have to do this. And the whole time you're just like, Dad, can you just fucking sit and just chill? Just chill, which is really simple. Just sit by the fire and talk with us about whatever the fuck we want to talk about, right? Just do it. Just lean into the now. And this guy tells the story of he felt like he always held himself back from like leaning into joyful moments with his wife because he was always afraid that he'll lose it. He was always afraid of the future, of, well, if I lean into joy right now, it's going to make when I don't have it so much more painful. And then he tells a story. They got into a really bad car accident, and she was actually ejected from the car. She was on the ground, and she ended up dying on the scene. So he was holding her as she took her last breath, and he's holding her. And he was talking to Brene, telling the story. He's like, you know, Brene, like, as I was holding her and she was dying, I realized that leaning away from joy my whole life didn't make this moment easier. It just made it filled with more regret. And I think a lot of times when people talk about regret, some of it's from the meaning, but I think a lot of times it's because they missed out on the simple stuff too. And so these things are necessarily linked, right? Sometimes life is just holding your wife's hand, and that's it. It's just nice to know that she'll hold your hand. Sometimes happiness is just like, I remember one professor describing it as, my happiness is in bed feeling my wife's bum on my back. It's really simple. There's nothing deeper than that. It just makes me happy. And I think about it all the time. And she had passed away. He's like, I think about it all the time. I just miss having her bum on my back. That is simple shit. And that's the shit that we actually live for. And like meaning comes from this too. And meaning's good too. But we really forget about happiness. I forget about happiness. I constantly have to remind myself to just enjoy. And it's really hard to do, and we don't teach people how to do it very well.
I'm hard pressed to disagree with anything in that. I think my worry is that, well, and you had said it's a dialectic between meaning and happiness, kind of, right? I think there's a danger of going back to the idea of like, you know, privilege. Like, is it not a privileged position to be in, to be able to say this? I am just enjoying this moment as it is, and I'm achieving inner peace. It's like inner peace doesn't exist outside of a stable external world, or at least that's not in perpetuity. For example, if you're a rich person, you lock yourself in your castle and you protect yourself from the poor, starving peasants. You could achieve inner peace, but not for long, because eventually things get so bad that even your castle will collapse, right? So for a time, you can achieve that. And kind of going back to the natural selection idea is like, well, and I don't think you're saying this, so I'm not saying this as like a disagreement. I'm just kind of thinking, but like the inner peace cannot be the end goal as a pursuit, because you would just be like a Buddhist monk removed from the problems of the world, and eventually the problems of the world will eat you, sort of like Tiamat. It's like, well, if I move inward and achieve, you know, Absu is the chaos outside, and to avoid Absu, I will get that inner peace. Mm-hmm. And then lo and behold, it's like, oh, well, while you were, not you in particular, but while, you know, we were engaged in inner peace, these people who are poor and oppressed rose up and destroyed everything, and, you know, as is the course of history, right? And so from that perspective, I think there is something to the dialectical aspect of, you have to balance. You can't exhaust yourself. You can't, it's clear that you can do toxic productivity. Like, I hate that. The whole hustle culture. Gary V is super one-dimensional in one good way of like, yeah, generally speaking, it's good advice to work on one thing like really hard and pursue it. But his whole thing is like, if you can make money from it, do it. That's all that matters. It's like, no, that's not. That's a stupid idea. If it's bad for society, if it's bad for other people, don't do it. Mr. Wonderful, the money guy, he's like, why ever go out to dinner with, friends and pay this kind of money when I can just eat at home for, rice and beans? It's like, because you've maximized your objective function of money. And maybe, it's a game for him, super competitive, whatever. But I guess the reason that meaning, and we can, because I think we're circling in the same area, I think, at this point. But like, the reason I think meaning is the fundamental goal, the fundamental telos, and it's not necessarily a dialectical process, because I think happiness is a second. There is no happiness without meaning, but there is meaning without happiness, as you said earlier. So I think the meaning is deeper, in a sense, and I think that humans evolved the sense of meaning to engage, to be able to detect when they are in that space, or when they are in that, space and time, when they are maximally developing as individuals. And I don't think, my perspective, and this is all background and whatnot, and there's whatever, but like, I think that the highest order function of humans is to discover oneself rather than achieve like a point of enlightenment or something like that. And meaning is the path to that. Whereas like the inner peace, that that's also meaningful. And again, we're just using these words, whatnot. But like, if that's in the realm of happiness, like there is no happiness, there is no peace without meaning. If your life has no meaning, I just don't understand how you can have peace or happiness. So maybe, I don't know, any thoughts on that? And then maybe we can take it to a new direction.
I think if you don't have any happiness, do you even have any meaning, would be my question.
Yes. That's Viktor Frankl's whole thing in the concentration camps. No one was happy in the concentration camps. I think they exchanged jokes. They said that they retained their sense of humor. So there were moments of happiness as a product of meaning, but he said
that's what happiness is. Happiness is simple.
Right, but the only
moments.
people the people that served his theory, or his observation rather, because it wasn't a theory because he was in the concentration camps, and I think Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago, I don't know if he said this specifically. He echoed Frankl in other ways, but maybe not this way. But Frankl said the people who survived the concentration camps were the ones who found meaning in helping others. They adopted responsibility. And those are the people that laughed with each other. But the people who just kind of resolved to the conditions they were in died, or became so mentally decrepit that they didn't recover afterwards. And so, to me, that just hones the idea of meaning is primary before happiness. And the question is, well, what is meaningful at that? But we haven't talked about, like, where do you derive meaning? And it's like, that's the self-discovery. It's like, I don't really derive much meaning from what's something that I don't care about at all. I mean, certain forms of music. It's like there's certain kinds of music I just don't like at all, and no matter how much I want to, I can't will myself to like it. Or certain video games. Like video games I used to play and enjoy, I can't any longer. I can't will myself to have meaning in those. And so meaning is something that's outside of your control. It's transcendent. It's outside of you. And that's the discovery aspect of it. And that's, I don't know, that's my understanding of it in a nutshell.
Maybe both are occurring. Like I said, I'm not fully firm on all of these ideas. I just think about like lots of the people that I've helped who have been deeply, deeply suicidal. When I think about those individuals and their progress back to essentially like life, the first thing that had to happen is we had to figure out how to reduce a lot of their meaningless suffering. Because a lot of people who are highly suicidal, there's oftentimes some level of good reason for it, right? So in one case, I helped somebody by removing them from a pretty decently abusive situation that they were growing up in. So we reduced their suffering. And then, for the most part, just simple happiness came. And meaning in their life feels like, to be honest, for that individual, I think it's only starting to form. I think for the most part, meaning for her has become like family. She's had a kiddo, but she's been a little bit lost. Like she hasn't had a ton of meaning.
A kid will give you meaning, I think. I don't know. I don't have it, but a child, I would imagine.
Yes,
the meaning is
but
self-evident.
That's probably the first thing.
Sure.
Yeah. But what brought her back was the reduction of suffering, and then what made her life thriving, because she was thriving, but she's still thriving, was just like simple happiness. And so maybe we're just quibbling on the differences in meaning behind meaning versus happiness. I'm very hesitant to say that you must have meaning before happiness because, for example, with a lot of suicidal people, I think I see a lot more of the simple stuff first, and then the meaning typically forms in that process of recovery.
Sure.
Like post-traumatic growth seems to occur in the process of it, and it seems to be a pretty solid mixture of deepening of relationships, reprioritization of life, some meaning stuff, but then also like having just better relationships overall, which is more of that like simple happy stuff. So I have a hard time disentangling them from one another.
Sure.
I guess it matters to figure out which one comes first. And so maybe it's the case that in survival situations, meaning has to come first because happiness can't be rendered from anywhere. And maybe in non-survival situations, like around like mental health and suicide, it's reversed. I'm not totally sure. I just know in my experience with a lot of people, as I've seen them kind of come back from the brink, it feels like the reduction of suffering, a small increase in just like daily happiness. They just like start laughing again. They start singing Disney again. So like these little happy moments begin to occur. And it feels like out of that is oftentimes birthed meaning, but I understand people can have meaning without happiness. So like, I don't know if one has to come before the other.
Sure.
I would mostly advocate, I think the richest lives are when people have both. And I don't think you get happiness just from meaning. I think you have to work at it.
I can agree.